in. We're celebrating the new album, Stockholm Syndrome, with Chris Dowd of Fishbone. He's rolling on the bus, heading from Texas through Arkansas, heading to
Yeah.
Georgia. And yeah, we're talking about the rights and the wrongs. But take us back, man. 79, you're bust out to Woodland Hills, the West Valley, San Fernando Valley, north of, Hollywood and Bel Air and all that. And you're meeting. Yeah, just put
Mhm.
the card right there on that. And you meet a young Angelo Moore who's actually living out there with his mom, and you and Fish and Norwood and Kendall and Walt start making this music. Talk about the hybrid of sounds you guys were listening to at the time.
Well, I I grew up in a household where my uncle was a I would call him a frustrated musician. He taught me how to play piano, and we would sit there in the den where the piano was and the record player, and excuse me, and the stereo system was set up, and we just play, and he just played music, and he was like a musical Rolodex. He was like one of those kind of people where he was like Shazam before Shazam. He could tell you whatever song was playing on the radio. And then when you got into sort of hardcore bebop and jazz, he could hear like a song and immediately identify who was playing, and it used to blow my mind. So he was like a huge um influence in that way. And so by the time I got into seventh grade, the first person I met was Kendall, because we were 2 blocks from each other and used to take the bus stop to go to school together. And it was the summer of 78, and we had discovered Devo. You know,
Freedom of
I say
choice.
before, yeah, well, actually, it was Are We Not Men? We Are Devo.
Oh, of course, from Akron,
That
Ohio,
record.
man. That
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
flipped the script right there.
And then we started to realize, like, wow, they're from Ohio. Bootsy's from Ohio. The Ohio players are from
Yeah.
Ohio. uh, and there's just such a rich tradition of funk music. Zap was from Ohio. I mean,
Oh yeah,
my
Heat
friend
Wave,
Foley who played with Miles
Lakeside,
Davis,
Zap.
Lakeside, yeah. Oh, yeah, and Walt happened to be, his family happened to be from Youngstown, Ohio.
Okay. I actually went to
So,
high school in Dayton, Ohio. I'd see the Ohio players driving by in their Cadillacs, man. It
wow,
was
that is so cool.
skin tight.
Yeah, Junie Morrison.
Oh yeah, man.
Um,
Sugarfoot,
so,
rest in
yeah,
peace.
yeah, rest in peace. Both Junie too. Yeah, both of
Yeah.
them. And so, we so Kendall had "Are We Not Men? We Are Devo," and that B-52's record had come out. That
The
first
the
record with Rock
debut.
on it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Rock Lobster and
and and and and and we were listening to the radio, and there was a station called 1580 K Day,
yeah.
and certain artists, and it doesn't really happen this way anymore, but certain artists would blow up on K Day. They'd be such huge songs that it would transcend across the board on every radio station. I think the only hardcore radio station that didn't play stuff like Devo or B-52s was the rock station in LA called KLOS. And that's because like rock reigned supreme. They didn't have to play anything they didn't want to play. They were the radio station for the bands that were playing arenas like Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
So they were
But
shot callers.
you had K Rock playing the ska and the funk and the punk and the
At that time, you
alternative.
didn't even have K Rock doing that. K Rock was like kind of a really obscure sort of underground station that was famous because of Rodney Bingenheimer and sort of his influence of the glam scene in Los Angeles
Yeah.
on but slowly K Rock started to really focus on playing local music, and they started playing and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then Jane's Addiction came along, and as the rest they say is history.
Yeah, Oingo
But to
Boingo and all that.
but to yeah, and Boingo would not actually, and to be fair, Oingo Boingo was probably the first big local band that blew up on KROQ.
Yeah.
And they were playing that, and Richard Blade was playing all this stuff from Europe, ABC and Tears for Fears and Spandau Ballet, and and on and on. Some of it at the time I didn't really, I wasn't really feeling. I do now. I imagine
Yeah.
it's because of nostalgic reasons and so on and so forth. But the way I really got turned on to punk music or any stuff like that is because Rock Lobster and Whip It had become such big songs that they were playing them on the hip hop on what would be like basically the birth of the hip hop station
Right.
in Los Angeles, which was 1580 K Day. Um,
Greg Mack.
yeah, yeah, exactly. They were playing Rock Lobster and they played Whip It. And when Cars got Gary Newman came out,
Yeah.
that was such a big song. They were playing that too. Because truth be told, black folks like anything that has rhythm.
Sure.
There's like a good beat. They're down. Because you dance because people really. Yeah, I don't really feel like people go out like they used to. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
when people are like, well, Chris, you're in your 50s. Of course not. I'm like, yeah, everybody used to get down. I I I I I, I feel that that is a thing that is indicative of the United States right now. Because I just got back from France and I went out to see a lot of music there, and you see a lot of people from every sort of walk of life and age out being social, and I feel like that's something we've lost as a country because of the computer in a lot of ways. It's it could be very isolated. However, I don't want to go down that road right now. Um, but I want to go back to the thing about Devo and meeting Kendall,
Mm-hmm.
and they were playing. And the the artist that really kicked that open was probably when David Bowie wrote Fame, because Fame was such a
Yeah.
big song, and it was so funky that they were playing Fame is probably one of the first what I would call a rock artist being played on a black urban station, because
Sure.
that's how big a song Fame was. So Fame sort of opened up that door, and so Devo and the B-52s and Gary Newman could come through. And so when Kendall and I heard that music on the radio and it was so different, we started to kind of think, well, maybe we could do that, you know? And then the band came along called the Bus Boys,
Yeah. Brian O'Neill.
Brian O'Neill, and we used to go see them play. And then eventually I met, the dudes from Sound Barrier. And
Yeah.
then we really were like, fuck, we could actually get signed to a record deal and everything. And then, like, holy shit, this is like, there's something really cool and sort of special and energetically going on. It's really like different. And then we start touring the United States, and we just see exactly how different we are because it was like, you had the old guard, you had, Jefferson Starship and Journey and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
they ruled the airwaves because they were the dudes that were playing the arenas. And every cool radio station or DJ, of course you want to go hang out with the dudes got 30,000 people screaming their name, and that's the guy whose music you're playing on your radio station. You're talking about, ad dollars and so on and so forth. So of course, but for a very, very, very long time, us and the Chili Peppers and the KRQs of the world were kind of the redhead stepchild. Um, but eventually, because we all went out and built this sort of community um, of listeners, eventually the world caught up to what we were doing. And by the time, Nirvana came out with Nevermind, it was, my peers were now
Yeah,
playing
superstars.
the arenas that um, we had sort of been, ostracized from being a part of that at one point. Like that, so it wasn't just like Fishbone didn't have access to that. It was like, all of our peers didn't because we were doing something that was considered edgy or provocative or too political, or you know what I mean? But eventually the world, caught on.
Yeah, talk about going on that Beastie Boys License to Ill tour because, you know, hip hop is becoming crossing over with Run DMC and those acts. Uh, I always remind people that hip hop really came in through the underground. Didn't come into black music or R&B. It came through like punk rock and the gay clubs and the underground. You know, it was like, Beastie Boys had opened for Madonna as she broke out, and she had the nerve to put them on, even though little girls were horrified by Ad Rock and these guys. But by the time License to Ill came out, now with Rick Rubin, they're crossing over. It's hip hop, punk rock, alternative, underground was now mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Well,
Murphy's Law, Fishbone.
yeah. Um, you know, how do I put this? It's not like my peers, the Perry Farrells and the Fleas of the world, were not Dave Navarro. We're no stranger to um, wild nights and chaos and anarchy. You know,
Yeah.
um, we had some raging. We threw my Kendall and Norwood's 21st birthday. Jane's Addiction and the Red Hot Chili Peppers played. You know,
Yeah.
in a warehouse um, in Silver Lake.
Okay.
Um, and it was fucking wild. But the wildest tour I ever been on in my life was that License to Ill tour. That shit was bananas. It was like Slayer was a hip hop band.
Yeah.
Like we would come
Fight
to
for your right to
town and it
party
would be like
was like Fight for Your Right to Party
it
is the
was
number one
so
song on
fucking
MTV.
huge. Yeah, and not only that, it was like a battle cry to just disrupt whatever town we were in. It was like they ascended, like these kids ascended on that show like a plague of locusts. And it was just drinking and everything you fucking imagine, sex and drinking and just I don't think I've ever been that wasted in my life. And I've been around some motherfuckers that party, like I said. But that License to Ill thing was really crazy because it started off as one thing. A week after License to Ill came out, we went from playing like, small theaters to like the Houston Astrodome. And
Right.
Um, it wasn't just it was huge. It was like a phenomenon. Um, it was like Elvis or some shit. It really was. Um, but we would get run. And speaking of being in the Bible Belt right now, being in red states, we would get run out of states. Like we got ran out of Texas
Oh wow.
because they were like, if that fucking big dick comes out of the fucking stage, we're arresting every fucking body on site. And that happened in Corpus Christi. It happened in Dallas. It happened in Houston. Everywhere we went, and to their credit, they were just like, let's just do the craziest, most outrageous thing. Let's just make up weird shit and see if people will do it. And that's what nobody ever really got about their, you know, dark sense of humor. Was like, what we had a big dick come out of the middle of the stage? That was just them riffing and seeing if people would actually take them seriously and do it.
Yeah, or
And they
a
did.
stripper in a go-go
Yeah.
cage.
Yep. All that shit was just
Yeah,
made up.
they were drawing young people because of MTV. So
Yep.
the authorities were going wild.
They were. They arrested everybody in New Orleans, and which was really weird because at the same time we were in New Orleans, Bad Brains was playing.
Wow.
And so they arrested Star and I think Doc. And I think the only two people that didn't go to jail were like Daryl and Earl and me. But the Beastie Boys were so big at the time that they just fucking wrote a check and bailed everybody out of jail, including Bad Brains. Because again, Bad Brains, Murphy's Law. Um,
Well, yeah, it was a real hybrid. I remember going to the Santa Monica Civic and seeing Fishbone with Public Enemy and Living Color, and
oh wow, you were at that?
I was at that show. Vernon Reed and Chuck
Yeah,
D
where
and
we got to do like all of. Yeah, we got to do all of two songs
yeah, yeah.
because it got so
Angelo
just
said the
yeah
Bloods and the Crips were the headliners.
because yeah, exactly, they were. That was a very strange day. We played Soul Train the only time we played it that day.
Oh, is that right? During the
and
afternoon, huh?
and that night we came and played. Yeah, yeah, we did a taping of Soul Train, and then we played that show that night.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
you had punk and
I was
hard
so
rock.
excited because it was a bill that we put together. Yeah,
Sure.
but it was so close to Venice that you had all of V13 show up and all those suicidal dudes that were kind of like a gang themselves. Um, and then you had, because we were there, you had the Crips show up, and that shit got out of control. The Santa Monica police shut down the whole entire show. I mean, because you were there,
Yeah, I
but
mean security didn't know how to screen people at the door. Now they're checking for rags and colors and all that. But yeah, back
yeah,
then,
and
as
they
long as
didn't
you had a
realize
ticket, you
that.
were coming in. And
Yeah,
they
and
had the
they didn't.
back door and everything where people could, sneak a shank or anything through there.
Yeah, and nobody realized that Kendall's brother was a Crip and brought the whole hood. because half of the hood, they're like, there are kids that we grew up with.
Oh
So
wow.
they were fresh out of Camp Crip, and they was like, yeah, the homie playing up at San Marcos Civic, cuz I'm going. And we were like, shit, I hope they don't show up because that's Venice 13's neighborhood, and it just turned into a fucking thing. And it was serious back then. Like it could go down. I remember I used to run into Jam Master Jay in my neighborhood where I grew up,
Uh-huh.
and he would totally trip because he's like, "Man, it's so beautiful here, and all these palm trees and da da da." And I had to be like, "Jay, don't let the smooth taste fool you, man. You're off Crenshaw. You go
Yeah.
right down that hill about 500 yards. You're in the jungle." And like, I'm like, "You're not in New York, man. There's different rules here. I'm telling you." And he's like, "Oh, word." I'm like, "Yes." It's a very different time, man. You know what I mean? And the sad part is, like, I think about it, those are just some kids that were super intelligent and capable that had no opportunity to rise to the occasion to be the best people they could be. Because really, I even think about how it affects our band. You have this part of the population that is dealing with generational trauma and then trying to rationalize it on an emotional level, like, just suck it up, man up, you know. And sometimes you can't man up to those situations, you know. Um, it's very hard, and but it's hard to be the change that you want to see in the world, or the change that you want for your own life. And sort of in this sort of generational ideology of, you know, what all that represents.
Well, I know you guys were coming off a Lollapalooza tour, and Kendall Jones was accused of mental instability and quit the band, moving to Northern California. And Norwood, goes after, tracks him down, thinking he's being, brought into a cult. What was that like dealing with all that at the time?
It was it was what made me quit the band. Part of the reasoning was
Okay.
like, if they, if this business and this situations and this life have driven Kendall to the point where he's had a nervous breakdown, like, I couldn't personally take that lightly. You know what I mean?
Uh huh.
Like, certain things you try to, shrug off, but when that happened, it really rocked me, and it made me sort of start to try to question what we stood for and what we were trying to accomplish and who we were as people and who we had become. You know, and of all the people in the band, at one point I was the only person that everybody was talking to. I don't think the other dudes in the band realized it because I never said anything. You know, I just wanted to be like, if I could come in and help heal a situation, I would do that. And that's kind of how, there's a picture of us floating around with all of us, the original lineup, and we're sitting around a table, and it's like that was my dining room table, you know. But you know, we all Kendall still feels quite wounded about how that came out, and the perception of his family that it gave his family, and I try to be sensitive to that now. Um, but certain wounds with people, man, it can be hard to let go of. You know,
Right.
people have their people have their feelings, and you know whatever's happening, it all feels valid to them. You know what I mean? And you know, but my understanding of it now is very different than what had happened in the past. But the bottom line is what really happened more than anything, what you had was a very overzealous district attorney in San Rafael trying to make his name because he had a rock band on trial, you know? And kidnapping is such a serious offense that um, excuse me, if someone alleges that charge against you, that, you know, the state is obliged to pursue it because it's considered such a serious crime.
Mm.
So there were a lot of factors in that whole thing that happened. Did Kendall have a nervous breakdown? I mean, yeah, even he admits that, you know. And as far as what was going on with his family, um, it was exacerbated by, an estrangement from what was going on in his family dynamic and a lot of different other factors. But I still think he's quite hurt by all of that
Yeah.
because what he explained to me at the time and what he was trying to explain was that he didn't want to go do Lollapalooza. He was exhausted and he needed to take time. And at the time, I think we were raised in this sort of way where, like crazy. That's some bullshit. That's a made up bullshit. You're fine. And you're not really taught to sort of deal with those emotions and where they can take you. So there was a lot of that machismo bullshit going on. And there's certain sort of mentality and thinking like, you know, he was being a little bitch because he was having an emotional problem, you
Got
know.
it. We'll talk about when you knew it was time for you to come back to the band and the new lineup with Spacey T and, of course, Angelo and your three new cohorts. Talk about the revived band and the new album, Stockholm Syndrome.
But I think what happened when I initially came back to the band, like, a lot of people that came back to the band were like, I want a full page ad in the New York Times, or whatever. I want to do press and make an announcement. And I didn't care about any of that shit. I feel like, the music can say more than anything I could ever say. You know, my focus coming back was like, let's make a great record. You know, that 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 brings some ears and some people back that may have stopped listening to the band or moved on to other things or what have you. That's life. But let's make big noise, And people had changed when I got back. They had asked me to come back to the band because a lot of people are trying to set up and blame Angelo for what was going on with the band. And I don't think you can blame one person. I think you have to take a, cross section of everyone and their participation and contribution in to whatever was making the thing successful at one time and not so successful, let's say in 2017, you know? So they asked me to come back to the band. Angelo was very apprehensive because he was still hurt by me leaving. And in some cases, not for the better. Um, we reached a tipping point for personal reasons with each other, and I would say financial. Um, and we sort of came to we had a come to Jesus moment.
Mm.
And in that come to Jesus moment, there were some things said, that some bells were rung that couldn't be unrung. And and people chose to quit. You know,
Right.
if they couldn't have it the way that they wanted it, then they quit. And I thought to myself, I've come too far to quit. I didn't come back to Fishbone to not succeed creatively. You know, and me and Angela, I was literally at the time when everything sort of imploded. I was ready to leave the band again, to be honest. But I couldn't see myself doing that to Angelo, especially how far we had come, what he had been through emotionally and spiritually, and having so many unanswered questions about my own personal input as an artist and a musician. To sort of come this far and not really still have the opportunity to make a record or do something recording wise that I saw was up to the standards of the band that I had left in 1995, I was like, fuck it. And so we stayed and we started working on Stockholm Syndrome, and it was not easy. Some of the songs I've been sitting around since the Orange Dickhead came down that escalator,
Oh wow.
you know, that spoke to that. And I wasn't going to not speak to that, you know?
And you got Spacey T back in the band. What do you feel the new unit is the strongest at?
Well, my approach, and I think Angelo's as well, was when we had a chance to rebuild the band, I didn't want to have anybody. I didn't want to be in a band with like a Walt clone, or you know what I mean.
Right.
I wanted to
A
play
Rocky
music.
George clone.
Well, definitely not a Rocky George clone, because no offense, but Rocky couldn't play reggae if his
Yeah.
life depended on it. He would not have been my choice. Love Rocky and Suicidal Tendencies. I think Rocky is a tremendous guitar player, but Fishbone is a band is a band that there are a lot of musical there's a
Some
lot of mastery stylistically you have to be able to do.
There's a
You
lot of
have to be,
ingredients in the gumbo.
you have to be able to play ska, you have to be able to play reggae, you have to be able to play metal, and you have to be able to play all of those things and be funky at the same time.
Yeah.
Those are the four sort of tenets of the band, and I would even say soul. You know,
Sure. The funk and soul.
and, and some people could not do that.
Got it.
And And the other thing is, I wanted to play with dudes that were actually better musicians than me. And I didn't want to play with a bunch of yes men or people that were like in their egos and shit like that. I wanted to be around people like how Fishbone started. We started as friends.
Sure.
And I wanted to get back to that. So that's what the new lineup really is. Some new, incredibly talented friends.
Yeah. A
You know?
harmonious gang. Well,
Yeah,
talk about, I know that you
and then
recorded
Tracy,
this. Go ahead.
and just to speak to Tracy, and Tracy is somebody I've been watching play who, like I said at the top of the conversation, that was somebody that like I saw him play and I was like, I could do he's saying to me that I can do this. Like I'm not alone. I'm not some weirdo because I don't want to play with like, you know, Luther Vandross or, or Billy Ocean or whatever, R&B, alternative, adult, alternative, contemporary pop shit.
Right.
So yeah. So,
Well,
Bob, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. What you were going to say?
no, I was just saying, I know you recorded this in the Bay. Talk about the studio that you used. I know it became a special kind of incubator for your ideas.
Well, to be honest, I met Chris through a friend of mine that was really tight with Mike Patton. She actually, when we met Mr. Bungle,
Okay.
she introduced all of us to each other.
Okay.
Mike Patton literally walked up to me and Angelo and gave us the first Mr. Bungle demos on a cassette tape. We went into the bus and listened to it immediately and were like, holy shit, Mr. Bungle is incredible. And so, because I had this friendship forever, I got introduced to Chris McGrew. And when that happened, it was just to work on this project that I've been wanting to do for myself. And it just evolved into we should do the Fishbone album here. And the room was Wally's hideout where they recorded everything from like, Dead Kennedy's Fresh Fruit for Rotten Vegetables
Okay.
to the Humpty Dance
Oh, wow.
to, Abraxas, um, Santana, and just all these different and Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. So we were in that room where they recorded Our House, and I was just like, yeah, we're going to do it here. I wanted to get Angelo out of Los Angeles because there's so many distractions
Right.
for us and be somewhere we could really focus.
Well, we can't.
So that opportunity kind of happened. Yeah, and that's how it was born.
Well, we can't be more excited to see it back. I mean, almost 20 years since the 2006 Still Stuck in Your Throat. Fishbone is back in a big way. Angelo Moore, Spacey T, and of course the new guys, Hassan Hurd, J.S. Williams, James Jones. And our special guest has been the one and only Christopher Dowd, keyboards, trombone, vocals, and so much more. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're rolling to ATL through the badass. She's going to see some family down there in Arkansas. So you enjoy, man. We look forward to
I
catching up
am.
with you on the road. And
And thank you so much for the great conversation, man. And
well, we appreciate
really
you.
just one of the best conversations I've had. And really, I couldn't say thank you enough. And thanks for giving us the platform. Um, thanks for giving Fishbone the platform to talk about the new record. I'm really incredibly and proud of it. Angelo is as well, and all the guys in the band, they were just amazing. To be a part of this, and I thank you for your time.